almost a minute of scrolling here through the Southside Minneapolis Rapid Response ICE Chaser Signal Group. You can see them actively checking plates, calling intersections, calling out chase agents. This is organized obstruction of federal law enforcement. It's a conspiracy to impede federal law enforcement. To remind everybody, when you're engaged in a conspiracy, everybody involved in the conspiracy is responsible for the foreseeable consequences of the conspiracy. Everyone involved is now engaged in federal felony, impeding of federal law enforcement in good for 8 years, and maybe much worse. Maybe they're responsible for the death of Alex Pretty. One of the reports here is that the lieutenant governor herself, Peggy Flanagan, a far-left progressive fascist, big supporter of trans rights, whatever that is a dispatch administrator, an authoritative figure, not just like an observer on the Signals chat. She's a boss. SignalGate, Minnesota Lieutenant Governor involvement. Flan, her name is Flanagan. Flan has been exposed. Look at this communication. Why would we be in trouble? Relax, says one of these insurrectionists. Another one responds, the Signal platform is not secure. It's been breached, Cam Higbee. I worked in communications. Once they figured out where we were, it's only a matter of time. Flan herself, the boss, has been exposed. We're all effed. I need to leave this state. You think that's going to be far enough for Trump not to find you? I need to leave this state. Uh-oh. Should I leave too? Maybe best to get out of the country entirely. By the way, flight from a crime is traditionally what we refer to as consciousness of guilt evidence. Evidence that not only would a prosecutor think what you're doing is unlawful, you think what you're doing is unlawful, and you don't want to be captured and held accountable. Consciousness of guilt evidence can result in a consciousness of guilt instruction to the jury, where the jury's told exactly that. Not only you are allowed to infer from this evidence of flight, if you believe it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, that not only does the prosecutor think this defendant is guilty, the defendant thinks the defendant is guilty. How damaging do you think that is in a trial? Robbie Starbuck here notes, if Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan was actually in the Signal Group coordinating operations to impede ICE, then this is a full-blown insurrection at the direction of the state of Minnesota. If she was not involved in any way, then she should say so, but the feds need to investigate this now. Yes, and again, I'm reporting others. This is her, Minnesota. This is what happens when we allow our elections to be stolen. I don't think any of these people are legitimately elected. I think they just managed to co-opt the election mechanism. Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, protect trans kids, with a knife on her t-shirt. And of course, it's the whole corrupt, progressive fascist Democrat network, up and down the scales. Tim Walz, campaign strategist, Amanda Kohler, was in the Signal chats, coordinating the doxing and harassment of ICE agents. And Libs of TikTok very carefully puts a question mark, because we don't know if this is true, but it's being reported. It's easy enough for people to say, I'm not in that chat. I can assure you, Attorney Andrew Branca is not in the Signals chat for the ICE attackers. This is an interesting point. Now, Chad Mizell, former chief of staff of the Trump administration, he writes, if this is true, that Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is in the Signal chat, can be tied to the Pretty shooting, she's in a lot of trouble. Let me spell it out, he says. If you're involved in a conspiracy, here interfering with ICE operations, and someone dies as part of that conspiracy, even if the deceased is a co-conspirator, all participants in the conspiracy can be charged with murder. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan better lawyer up. She may have some federal agents who want to talk to her. If you don't know what Signals is, it's an online, supposedly secure communication system, encrypted communication system, where people can communicate with each other in an organized fashion. And apparently, the pro-invader paramilitary forces in sedition against our federal government in Minneapolis and elsewhere around the country have been using this communications platform to coordinate their attacks on ICE. And not just coordinate at the attacker level. Left-wing journalists are part of this communication. State-level officials are part of this communication. People running for state office in Minnesota are part of this communications network. Alex Pretty, shot dead by ICE just a few days ago, was reportedly on this communications platform. And it's not just, of course, the signals coordination. They also appear to have, the ICE, anti-ICE insurrectionists also appear to have access to government surveillance tools. Look at this. If you want to know how protesters are able to locate and converge on ICE agents and suspected ICE agents almost immediately, it's probably because they're being fed automatic license plate readers, data by the local police department. I don't know if you have these things in your town. They're in my town. It seems like every few blocks, there's a black post, a little solar display, and a camera. And what it's doing is it's continually scanning every car's license plate that goes by, reports it into a giant computer system where tags can be flagged and then there are locations immediately identified from these cameras. And of course, these are not the only cameras that an urban center police department would have. There'd be more traditional surveillance cameras mounted around the city, traffic cameras, all that kind of stuff. The Twin Cities, he writes, has over 300 of these license plate scanner cameras and uses AI technology made by a company called Flock Safety, I'm familiar with Flock, to monitor, track, and enforce traffic laws. This is an incredibly powerful system. It's an announcement of the new business network. In June, Flock bragged about the ability for businesses to subscribe to Hot List, which alerts subscribers to the location of select cars that pass any Flock license plate reader, regardless of who's operating the camera. Real-time monitoring of select cars. Well, it would be very helpful, wouldn't it? For the anti-ICE insurrectionists to have access to this, it would explain why they're so rapidly able to converge on rental cars, ICE vehicles, how coordinated they are. And this overlays with the Signal Group. Apparently, they've illegally captured 5,000 plates being discussed in the Signal Group. And some of these administrators of this group, like we already talked about, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, are connected directly to Tim Walz. Plate after plate after plate. Breaking, it's confirmed. Minneapolis activists tracking ICE officers, running plates, actively following them around the city. This isn't a protest. It's an organized resistance with Democrat officials connected to it. Homes should be raided. Arrests should happen. You smell the insurrection in the air? It smells like burning wood and gunpowder. More consciousness of guilt evidence. Insurrectionists fleeing the state and the country. A tipster messaged some of the people in one of the Minnesota insurrectionist signal chats. The user indicated she intends to flee the state because we're in so much trouble, and maybe even flee the country. And again, it's not just individuals exercising their First Amendment rights here. It's these violent anti-ICE insurrectionists. It's people in government. It's not only people in government. It's people looking to be in government. Look at this. Attorney General Keith Ellison. This is the guy who railroaded Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd prosecution. Quite the piece of work, this dude. Also appears to have been coordinating with the Somalians in their fraud efforts, promising them that he would make sure he kept the money flowing. The spice must flow. Hey, Keith Ellison? More Minnesota officials. Amanda Kohler, I already mentioned. We have Tim Pool notes, if the local government's in active rebellion against the federal government, it's Civil War-esque, isn't it? Reminiscent of Fort Sumter? Who do we have in the signal chats? Government officials, anarchists, Antifa, gang members, and journalists. Journalists. Look at this. Ben Hovland, photojournalist at Minneapolis Public Radio. And as soon as his name was exposed, what does he do? He locks down his X account. More consciousness of guilt evidence that can be introduced into court to allow the jury to infer that these people know they're guilty. That's why they're doing all this. And it's not just people already in government. This is one of the strengths of the left. They're so psychotically passionate about forcing others to bend the knee. They're so fascist. And it's a problem for the right. It really is. Because the truth is, victory will always go to the side that's determined to win over the side that just wants to be left alone. And the right largely just wants to be left alone. These people don't. These people want to put a boot on your neck and do it with judgmental justice. They're running for office. Minnesota State Senate candidate Anita Smithson caught in the anti-ICE signal group chat. She's running for office, and she'll probably win. That's why things are so insane. And of course, part of this is they have to get the federal government out of Minnesota. They're all going to go to prison over this fraud. Trump just posted, Minnesota is a criminal cover-up of the massive financial fraud that's going on. Now it's not just the illegals that are at risk of being put in a cage until they're deported. It seems like it's everybody in a position of authority anywhere in the state of Minnesota. It's amazing. Even Alex Prete, Libs of TikTok, is reporting that Alex Prete was participating in these signal chats. Again, that would make perfect sense given the activities in which he was engaged. Leftist groups, their CryptPad, I guess it's an encrypted document, reveals illegal and subversive plots, disrupt Border Patrol checkpoints and ICE raids, of course, disrupt E-Verify program. That's how you determine an employer would be to determine if someone's an illegal. Undermine military recruitment efforts, engage in subversion inside the Trump administration, especially the Department of Justice, subversive government and military insider leaks, disrupt U.S. weapons manufacturers. Yeah, Mark Kelly's not the only progressive fascist who's served in the military. They've got their share. Disrupt U.S. weapons manufacturers, block development of military or fossil fuel infrastructure, impede military tech development, disrupt government officials' travel, subversive social media posts, hacking, flooding systems. Just imagine if a foreign nation sent in troops to do all this. Wouldn't we call that an act of war? I'm pretty sure we would. Kevin Bass notes, I'm horrified. I analyzed public databases and media reporting on violent confrontations with ICE this past year. Just 9 counties account for 2/3 of violent confrontations. Look at this. Does this not look like localized, concentrated insurrection against the United States in progressive fascist strongholds? A county among these top 9 non-cooperating sanctuary jurisdictions is 600 times more likely to have a violent confrontation with ICE than any of the other 3,000 plus counties in the country. These things aren't randomly distributed. This is not a grassroots movement protesting ICE. Now, I mentioned this early. Chad Mazzell says, hey, this is a conspiracy now to attack ICE. And if a death results, all the conspirators could be on the hook for that death, akin to like a felony murder situation. Now, my buddy Shipwrecked Crew is asked about this. They asked Bill Shipley, former federal prosecutor. I just covered one of his Substack columns in a live show recently, I think Saturday. Tiberius Monk says, Ship, if it's true that some government officials are part of the Signal group that are encouraging this and end up getting people like Alex Prete killed, could they be guilty of murder? And Ship says no, but they are potentially exposed to a conspiracy to obstruct charge, and if convicted within the relevant facts of the case, would be that the obstruction led to the death of another. That fact would be a basis upon which a judge could use his or her discretion to impose a longer sentence. Now, Bill is a very good and very experienced lawyer, so you disagree with Bill at your peril. But I'm going to disagree. I see a path to this. Co-conspirators can be found guilty of murder. They're guilty of whatever bad outcome is a foreseeable consequence of the conspiracy. So if there's a conspiracy to, like the movie Office Space, right? Where those guys tweak the computer system to, what did they do? They rounded up each check by a couple of pennies and they get the pennies. If you're in a conspiracy to embezzle money, you're all guilty of embezzling money. Every member of the conspiracy who actively advances the conspiracy agrees to be part and does some active step. But you would not expect an embezzlement to result in a murder. So if one of those conspirators goes crazy and murders someone, you wouldn't hold the other embezzlement co-conspirators liable for the murder. But what if it's a conspiracy to rob a bank midday, like in the movie Heat, with machine guns? Can you reasonably foresee that a death would result there? And I would say everybody involved along the lines of felony murder is responsible for any death that results. And just imagine if the conspiracy was the conspiracy to murder someone. It's an assassination plot. Only one person in the conspiracy is going to be the shooter. Only one person is going to be the guy that pulls the trigger. But every conspirator knows what the purpose of the conspiracy is. It's to take another person's life. I think they're all guilty of that murder as co-conspirators. And so I think it's not that much a stretch when you know that if you're feloniously attacking armed ICE agents, armed with your own gun, and then fighting lawful arrest, that it's foreseeable that a death could result, either your death or one of the officers. So I think every conspirator in there, these signal conspirators, they know that they're engaged in stochastic terrorism. They know what they're doing. They don't know specifically which person is going to do what to end whose life, but they know they're putting out this emotionally energized hate into the community. They know people are susceptible to being brainwashed by it and acting upon it. So you may not know the specifics of who's going to do what, but you know somebody is going to do something. That is certain. As certain as throwing a rock off a bridge. You may not know exactly where it's going to land, but you know it's going to land. So this is, I would argue that this is foreseeable, that deaths like Alex Preddy are foreseeable, and therefore the co-conspirators should be held responsible.